regime.
Now, riot police in Bahrain again resorted to tear gas and stun grenades to disperse the latest unauthorized demonstration. And dozens of people ignored the government's ban and took to the streets demanding the release of prisoners of conscience. Well, for an expert's opinion on the story, I'm now joined by Patrick Henningsen, a geopolitical analyst for the UK Column website. Patrick, it's good to see you today. Thanks for coming on the programme. As you well know, the Bahraini government has been internationally criticised for a brutal crackdown on protesters. Even evidence, according to the Bahrain Independent Commission of Inquiry, evidence of so-called child torture. All of this, and yet at the same time, the rulers feel safe and protected. Why is that?
There's a bit of a double standard at play, as we know, in Bahrain. If you look at the situation in Bahrain, this has been brewing and boiling over for over 1 year now, but yet it's been more or less not commented on at all in the global mainstream corporate media and some of the state-run media organizations like the BBC. So I think it's obvious why Bahrain is hosting the U.S. Fifth Naval Fleet, and after the U.S. elections, the war drums with Iran will be beating a little bit harder and accelerating in aggressive talk from Israel and whoever gets elected in the U.S. election. So Bahrain is an important military outpost for the West.
Well, certainly when it comes to Israel, Netanyahu, as of late, has certainly been banging his fists and rattling his sabre, really wanting to launch some sort of strike on Iran. But for now, I must keep our focus on that of Bahrain. On Tuesday, a Bahraini court decided to uphold the guilty verdict for opposition activists accused of plotting to overthrow the government. It was actually a ruling deemed, quote, deeply regrettable by a UN representative. Where does the opposition movement go on from here?
Well, they're in a very difficult position, the opposition movement, because as a result of this ruling, some of the potential sentences for protesting against the government could be as much as life in prison. So what's happening in Bahrain, they're sort of constructing a sort of pogrom to quell any dissent whatsoever. But look at the history of this movement, Rory. It's just been increasing over last year. So I don't think this movement's going to be snuffed out, these threats, because they've already been torturing and imprisoning people throughout the last few years.
But
for this
Patrick, I'm sorry to interrupt you. You talk about the movement gathering steam, gathering pace, and increasingly getting louder and louder in Bahrain. But there are some people that are calling for the radicalization of the movement, and that would only make things, as many would assume, entirely worse. So what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I would agree. No one wants to see a violent uprising. No one wants to see this sort of the violence that you see in countries like Syria. But that's a different type of violence because it's being backed by the West in proxy fashion through various other countries and Gulf states. The problem in Bahrain is this is an actual democratic reform movement. This is a real Arab Spring movement. This isn't like the kind of fake Arab Spring that you saw in Egypt that was mostly George Soros, NGO sort of driven, Twitter-driven revolution. This is a genuine reform where you have the majority Shiites being more or less oppressed by a royal family that's been in power much longer than the Assad family, the Al-Khalifis. 4 years in the prime minister's seat for the uncle of the prince or the king.
But Patrick, I'm sorry to jump in again. I do apologise. But when it comes to the issue of, OK, let's try and bring the sides together here. Let's try and bring those in the opposition to speak with those in the government and in the royal family. And ultimately, there are many that are saying that, well, those in power are just not interested. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it would be nice to see them come to a table and negotiate, as you said. That would be the ideal situation. But the reality is, much like how Samantha Power and some of the top heads in Washington were giving marching orders to the Egyptians like Morsi and all their favorites for the election. The Bahrainis are taking their marching orders from Washington and London. There's no doubt about it. There's too much at stake. Bahrain is in absolutely the most key position in the Straits of Hormuz. So the existence and the maintenance of the U.S. Navy using Bahrain as their chief outpost is of excellent strategic importance, and they will not negotiate. They will not tolerate a democratic uprising in Bahrain where they could make an unstable leadership. They need that as an outpost for Western imperialism.
Patrick Henningsen, a geopolitical analyst for the UK Column website. A great pleasure to have you on the programme today. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Roy.